Welcome to another interview with the Dana Foundation Career Network on Neuroscience and Society. My name is Francis Shen. I direct the Career Network, and I am really excited today to speak with Thiago Arzua. Dr. Arzua is the Leon Levy Postdoctoral Scholar at Columbia University in the Mortimer B. Zuckerman Mind Brain Behavior Institute. And we're going to talk today with Dr. Arzua both about his work as a neuroscientist but also his really innovative work in taking that neuroscience outside the lab. And so, Dr. Arzua, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is super exciting.
First question is, could you tell us a little bit about your journey studying chemistry in college and then neuroscience degree and a lot of training? How did you get to where you are today at Columbia University?
I ask myself that every now and then. My interest in chemistry is probably from way early on in life. I think I was very interested in just how things are made and how everything works. And my chemistry teacher in high school was actually the one that made me steer me towards neuroscience because I remember asking what is the hardest thing to study, and he just blurted out it's the brain. And I started chemistry in college with the intent of studying what I called neurochemistry. That doesn't really exist, but I wanted to study basically neurotransmitters, and somehow I realized that chemistry doesn't necessarily study that directly. Ended up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, studying stem cells and studying how different other chemicals can affect the brain. And at some point during the PhD, I realized that I really was not as interested as some of my colleagues in studying the same protein for 20, 30 years or the same disease for the rest of my life. And I wanted to study how the environment changes us, how the environment can impact still the chemistry of the brain, but in other ways, and started in 2022, the postdoc that I'm currently in with Dr. Bianca Jones Marlin, looking at how noradrenaline, so I still have the aim of maybe getting a tattoo of noradrenaline on my arm, but how noradrenaline can modulate what we call generational trauma or generational stress, looking at how noradrenaline shifts can impact how trauma and stress are represented in the brain. So still, I think still carrying a little bit of that childhood of like, I just kind of want to know how things work. And spend a lot of time just kind of breaking things in the lab and then trying to fix them again and then making sure that everything was working and a lot of time playing with lasers and still hopefully getting something scientifically out of that.
You have not just accomplished degrees in neuroscience, you are award winning. So our viewers understand. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit. You were selected by Forbes magazine in 2022 as one of the 30 people, just 30 under 30, in science. You have won the Outstanding Scholars in Neuroscience Award program from the NIH. You've won the Early Career Policy Ambassador Award in that program from Society for Neuroscience. What advice do you have for students who would want to emulate this success? What have been some of the keys to, I know you're young in your career, but boy, you're doing some pretty amazing things.
I would say, I think one of the best advices that I've gotten was to just apply for everything, search for, especially if you come from, like I did, an international background where you don't necessarily qualify for everything. I think from the time I was in college to grad school to now, I still carry on this level of why not? So even I think the NIH award, I think it was their first or second year doing that award. And I saw the award being posted on Twitter, and at the time I was just like, yeah, sure, I can pull up a 500-word essay and work on this. I think a lot of those opportunities were very much someone telling me that this is tangentially related to what you're doing, or this is that you would be a good fit for this thing. Not necessarily, not necessarily a post hoc thing of like, oh, I've done these things and now you get the award, but more of a, oh, I didn't know this existed. I should go to apply. I should go and look it out. I should go check it out. I think especially young trainees can have a lot of the famous imposter syndrome. And I think at some point I realized that you can still apply to these things. You can still kind of search for those opportunities, search for different, I, I guess, awards, different opportunities, even if you don't believe in it at the time, even if you're still kind of, no, I still haven't done enough, I still haven't published this, or I still haven't finished a degree. I think a lot of those things were very much just why not? And then when they work, it's really cool when they actually turn out. But if they don't work, they're usually not that much, or they are quite a lot of work. But I think it is a very low risk compared to a high reward of continuing to do neuroscience and continuing to talk about neuroscience. So I'd say just apply for many, many things, even if you don't fully believe in them. Um, and I still carry the same energy applying for postdoc fellowships, applying for different things where it might be a little bit of a stretch or it might be something that I haven't thought about before, but just being open and flexible with the opportunities that show up.
That's great advice to apply for everything. I want to transition because we could talk more about your neuroscience career, which is amazing, but we met because I saw you present a poster at the Society for Neuroscience about your project called the Parental Brain. And I'm just going to read out the description and then I want to ask you about it. So, the Parental Brain collaboration is the manifestation of your lab's desire to teach and learn more about the intricacies of the parental brain as well as to honor and expand the amazing network of student, researchers, and lifelong learners, both at Columbia University and Taconic Correctional Facility through the Hudson Link and prison education programs. Bottom line, you are taking neuroscience out of the lab, out of the campus, and into correctional facilities, expanding access. That is such an innovative and awesome program. It's not what we see neuroscientists doing every day. So tell us a little bit more, both about the program, but also this neuroscience and society intersection. What motivated you and your colleagues to do it? And what are you seeing as the effects of this program?
Yeah, I think very much on the vein of kind of applying and searching for these opportunities. This was a little unexpected. I think Hudson Link started way before I started this postdoc, but we heard that they wanted more teachers, they wanted more people to do these courses. The idea of wanting to do something societally relevant and maybe not necessarily studying a disease or a protein forever was what drove me to the postdoc that I'm doing in the first place. So when Dr. Marlin started the lab, I also, back when Twitter was very useful for scientists, I just asked her why was she opening a lab, what was she studying, and we carry on I think the desire of doing relevant things to society even through science, but not necessarily as a separate entity that just does the science. We constantly talk about the implications of our work. We constantly talk about how to responsibly do our work. And I think that beautifully pivoted to bringing this to Taconic. It is a medium security prison, a woman's only prison. And teaching the parental brain was so fascinating because I do not have kids, but the students at Taconic did have kids and had many thoughts about the science of the parenting brain. We had many discussions about scientific literature. Why does it need to be written a certain way? Why some words are more complicated? Why would you write this in a not accessible way? And the project that came out of that, I think it was seeing that that there's this divide of we're studying the parental brain in the lab. It is very difficult to then bring that to the rest of the world in a accessible way. We then partner up with Columbia students who have a little more access to resources as far as like internet, computers, and all these things go, and make them partner with the Taconic students. They were both taking the same course. They both read the same papers, and we really just gave them a grant to write. They wrote grant proposals of things that they wanted to see study. And those were just, I still love them. The ideas came from all over the place. Some students wanted to study how mama bear does the cub rearing. Some students wanted to see how testosterone can affect the male parent part of things. One of my favorites was just very intense, but looking at the socioeconomic determinants of child development and how much would like defining very strictly like I want to look at these fMRI studies, I want to look at these things. And the Columbia students at on their side turned all of those things into accessible science. So made beautiful designs, beautiful graphs, basically turning those ideas into something that we can then bring it back to someone who's not a scientist and see this is how science is done. This is why this study can be done in humans, and this one we need to do it in mice. Well, this is how we would do these things. It was also very just amazing to see how some of the things that we take for granted in the lab are very it's very not much for granted in the outside world, like how why mice instead of another animal, why study this thing and not why not study sadness, why not study depression. But I think even more interesting than that was the things that we think are very challenging and very scary. We in our lab we study generational trauma, which means we study epigenetic inheritance, which in some circles is almost a controversial topic. It's Lamarckism. It is this thing that geneticists argue with us. And then when we talked about the same things in prison, they were like, yeah, of
Hmm.
course, duh. Why would that be a thing? They just had this very natural feeling of like, yes, that makes sense. I seen this. I experienced this. So it was just incredible to see what we think are these like very controversial topics sometimes are not and things that we take for granted like of course you'd study this in a mouse, of course you would look at this brain region, or of course that's how you'd go about it, are not necessarily that straightforward. And we ended up with a pretty happy class of like Columbia students getting access to, I think, a population of students that they might not otherwise have access to. And the Taconic students also breaking down the barriers a little bit when we started this almost back-to-back letters. They were very concerned that the Columbia students would judge something or would misspell something, or they were just concerned in general. And at the end, they were sending letters to each other, congratulating them on their work. They were praising each other. One of the moments was just having like reviews done. And in a very scientific way, one of the students was just like, reviewer number two is not being helpful. Reviewer number two didn't add anything to this. So it was just very gratifying to see how we can bring these things to many different populations of studies or of students. And I think our science benefits from that. There are projects that we're still talking about today that like came from ideas that we discussed with these students. There are things that we reconsider about like how we write our articles, how we phrase certain things, why use 16 acronyms when we can just say what we're
Hmm.
studying. So yeah, it was a really fascinating, I think, a project that is now becoming something bigger.
I hope it continues to grow and look forward to watching it grow. We're probably at the end of time, but I want to give you a chance to answer this last question and really reflect on anything else we haven't covered, which is what advice would you give for students? We have many students who are in this position to say, I want to be a great neuroscientist. I want to do neuroscience research, but I don't just want to do neuroscience research. I'm doing this because I want to make an impact on the world, my community, and I'm motivated by that. But sometimes they feel they get in the lab and they can never get out of the lab. You seem to be bridging both. As I mentioned before, you're award-winning neuroscientist. You're doing checking all those boxes, but you're also very engaged in the community. What advice would you have for students, trainees, potential trainees to be able to balance and doing both of those things?
I would say that I take a lot of pleasure of talking about science and being in the spaces of being like the slight uncomfortable of teaching or of speaking. And it makes me want to go back to the lab and study these things. If I were to just be in the lab all the time, I think I would constantly crave these other opportunities, knowing that they still take time away from the lab. So it is almost a balancing act of pick the things that will bring you joy. So if you want to go to a high school and talk to high schoolers, if there are opportunities to do any kind of outreach, even if it's not necessarily neuroscience. In graduate school, I did a lot of like natural museums and just talking about science in general. I think the concern is usually the the famous like graduate student guilds of I should be in the lab, I should be in the lab. I think what I learned over the time is that not being in the lab and being these other spaces, being more, I guess, getting the perspective of not being in the lab just made the time in the lab much better. And you end up also becoming a little more efficient as far as like, is it necessary? I think beginning of the PhD, beginning of grad school in general, you tend to do very long days, very long hours, and you realize that you're not actually getting that much done. And I think one of the advice that I would get is get that perspective. I think it is very easy to get boggled down on like this laser is not working. And then when you explain that to someone and why you're so frustrated that the LED went off, you realize like, oh, there are bigger things happening in the world right now. There are bigger things that I should be concerned. I think that perspective has always helped be more efficient and be more, I guess, cognizant of the time that I have in the lab. So if anything, it feels a little not super intuitive, but less time spent in the lab can make the time that you do spend in the lab much better.
That's great advice. And for more from Dr. Arzua, you can visit thiagoarzua.com. You can learn about things we didn't even get a chance to talk about today. Triathlon, you're a triathlete. You write, this is really important. I write in non-scholarly venues, which is great. You're an advocate and you're an artist. You are painting. You're doing all these things. And I hope that our trainees will go check it out, learn more from you. Thanks so much for being with us, Dr. Arzua. Obrigado, my friend. Thank you.